Hey legends, my name is Mo and welcome to the Can't Can Will podcast. I'm a Royal Marine who is dedicated to optimising human performance and want to bring you exposure to the fantastic people supporting the same aim. Today I speak to an individual who has been devastated by a life-changing incident. We discuss his adaptation to life, Remember the Fallen, and his changing career with the BBC, which has inspired those around him to be better tomorrow than today. This episode has been sponsored by Discreet Chaos. Head over to their Instagram at Discreet Chaos and use the promotion code CAN'TCANWILL21 to receive a 10% discount on all clothing. Episode 10, JJ Chalmers. Where are your humble beginnings? Where do they originate from?
Well, I mean, I'm just the same bloke that I ever was. That's kind of the one thing which maybe gets lost sometimes. Because it's quite easy to look at where I am now on the telly, on something like Strictly, the biggest, TV show going. If that's your first introduction to me, then I look like I'm some sort of high achiever, and I was probably the head boy at school, that kind of thing. So far from the truth. So far from the truth. Like in reality, when I started out in school, so just in the outskirts of Edinburgh, with a pretty ordinary mum and dad. I struggled massively in my first couple of years at school because I was dyslexic, and back then there wasn't really the support that you needed in mainstream schooling, and I was just going to get lost. Now, thankfully, my mum, absolutely, went out of her way to make sure that I got the support that was required, and got me into the right school, etc. So that I suppose what she was doing, except for sort of saving me from the condition, was also proven to myself, I suppose, that I wasn't a write-off, because it's very easy to get that in your head that you would just be a write-off because of it's harder for you, and you've got an excuse. Like the amount of times you meet people with whatever sort of condition or something as I would say as simple as dyslexia, for example, but it becomes their excuse that they will never be able to do X, Y, and Z. So, but it didn't mean that I was a flyer by any stretch of the imagination. Like I scraped my way through school. It was a totally pleasant experience. I absolutely loved the social part of it, but like I was always, pretty much down the bottom of the class, but just, worked hard and did, tick the boxes and got through it. And then, I suppose the sort of the big step moment came in my life was joining the Corps. And the reason that as you know, Mo, is influential for a whole heap of reasons. But I suppose for one big reason was the fact that it's the first time that I truly believed in myself that I might be capable of something which so many people had doubted me for, and I probably doubted myself. Like I've made myself essentially an unattainable goal, which I was determined to obtain. And that's, everybody should have something like that. But I just remember looking around the class at school and just seeing kids that stuff came easy to them. Or that would make the first team in sports, that kind of thing, and I was just never that guy. It didn't stop me trying, but even with my hardest try, I would always end up in the seconds or just end up short. But this was the first time I was like, that is something absolutely ridiculous, completely unobtainable, and I went out there and just buried my head in it and made sure that I got there. But as I say, I've never changed as a person up to this point. Everything I've lived through, I'm still just a bit of an idiot and a class clown, basically.
Do you think that being the way that you were at school, like you say, didn't ever make a first team, or you struggled maybe academically because of dyslexia? Do you think that looking back, had a positive effect on your journey?
Well, I suppose first of all, like when I look at my dyslexia for where I am today, I can absolutely trace a direct line from what it was like to struggle with dyslexia to being a TV presenter. In the fact that the thing that I struggled at was writing, and I had these stories in my head. I had something to say, but the only outlet for it was to put it on pen and paper when you're at school, or to speak up in class and be the class clown, be the wise guy. But that gets you in trouble. The one day of the year where actually I could be the best student in class was the day when you did you had to make a presentation. You had to stand up in front of everybody and deliver some talk about, I remember one year it was about beekeeping. That's what my dad did, whatever. And it was those days that I suddenly stepped up in class and I was like, I am the best here, because people were too shy to do it, or it just came so difficultly to them, whereas it was just natural to me. And that's what I've still got to this day, is that ability to put sentences together and actually just speak my mind.
You are annoyingly good at it.
Yeah. I've don't get me wrong, I've put some practice into it now, but as you know, Mo, I completely stumbled into a career in media. But it's because in some ways it finally clicked. This is the skill set which I've been either born with or has developed because of my dyslexia. That is the thing which I can do, which others can't. Let's go away and work really bloody hard on that. So I can trace that direct line. I just think in terms of the struggles that I had at school, and they weren't horrific. I think they were horrific in the very first instance until I got the support network that I required. But I just always remembered just kind of, I remember we used to do these these comprehension exercises at school. It's like a big box, and they were all color coded. And so red was the starter level, and then one day you could go through the whole rainbow and get to blue. And I was just always in red. I was just always scraping at the bottom, and people were doing things twice as fast as me, twice as hard as me, whatever it was. But it didn't break me. I'd still just cracked on and did what I could. But I just remember always just feeling like I was at the back of the pack a lot of the time. And then I joined the cadets when I was at school, and that was probably the first thing which I remember. Even as dumb as it sounds, even the cadets when we joined, and we were lucky enough to have Royal Marine cadets at our school. Every bloke joined because there was even within a school context, there was an idea that it was a pretty tough thing to do, and everybody quit straight away. And I'm talking there was 50 kids, and only 4 or 5 of us made it. And that, as you know, continues throughout the Corps. That was exactly what happened when I joined as a recruit. I think 52 blokes turned up for selection, and out of that pack, 5 of us made it in the end, or something like that. And so it was, as I say, the cadets gave me that first insight into something which, again, played to a skill set that I had. And I think a big part of it was just sheer determination, just putting up with hardship. Because I suppose that's what I'd kind of done throughout my whole life was, like I say, I didn't have a tough upbringing. I come from a, pretty middle class family, etc. We didn't want for too much. Don't get me wrong. My mum survived cancer 3 times when I was a kid. So, we had, but my parents aren't divorced. They didn't come from a broken home. There's lots of things absolutely in my favor. But I suppose that was the one thing that's kind of worked against me, was just feeling like I'm just going to have to graft a bit harder than everybody else. And again, you can feel sorry for yourself about that, or you can have that click moment where you go, I'm really good at grafting.
Mate, I'd like to tease out a little bit more about the schooling, because I've been working with some schools recently, and particularly kids with exam pressure. So as someone that was suffered from dyslexia, and you had to work and graft, that was an internal, maybe even a natural reaction, a natural reaction that you may have had. Can you remember what the supporting structures were, and how important was the role of your parents, and can you remember the sort of things they did to keep you on track? Because you could have quite easily have gone, I'm just going to focus on cadets, school, get lost.
So the first instance was the fact that I was in a school which had no support whatsoever for my dyslexia. And I had figured out, this is in primary 1, I figured out at a very young age that the best thing to do was get sent out of the classroom, because you didn't have to read and write if you got sent out of the classroom. So my mum was like, this kid is either going to end up being the horrendous class clown, but actually that doesn't last for long. What he's going to end up being is the bully. He's going to end up being a bully, because that's the thing that will get him sent out of the classroom easiest and quickest. So, as I say, she got me into a school which had a proper support network that could facilitate ensuring that I had, this is an interesting one. that I had equity rather than equality. Now, equality is when we give everybody the same thing. Now, for example, I went into exams throughout my school and I got extra time. Now, if you give everybody that extra time, then you still fall behind. What's the point? You have to give the extra time to the people who have a condition, which means that they will never be, never be able to compete on that level playing field. So it's not about equality of inputs, it's about equality of outputs. And that's what equity is. That's ensuring that everybody has the right support so that they can be the very best that they can be. And that's, when you take that into life or whatever it might be, that's basically essentially trying not to play to people's strengths, but play to people's weaknesses in many ways. How do you remove the weaknesses so that they can flourish by themselves, essentially? And I suppose the biggest part of that was, were the people who ran that sort of additional support network within the school. And there was one in my high school called Irene McFarlane, Miss McFarlane, who was just an amazing woman. And yeah, she kind of, in some ways, was looking after all the misfits. All these kids who, like, we used to, instead of doing a second language at school, so we all did French, and then you could pick up Spanish and German as your second language. We did extra English. And like, we got stuck in this classroom. It literally, sometimes looked like, not even a chairs match. It just felt like the misfit room sometimes. But I was really proud to be part of it, in fairness. Because I could just see through the fact that actually we weren't misfits. We were just needed an additional bit of support in some way, and that could unlock our potential. And that's what she did for me. She absolutely unlocked my potential, and gave me the support that I could end up getting some of the best grades in my school because of the support that I was given. Because she knew that I was capable of it, but just with the right support. And I suppose, to lead you to the point you make about me becoming a teacher, that was the thing which made me become a teacher, was the fact that someone like her and a few other people within my school, including the guy that used to teach me cadets, had such an influence on my life. And it was that idea of, imagine you could do that for a kid, like making sure that people don't slip through the cracks, making sure that they find the thing that they love, whatever it might be. Like, that's such an amazing point of influence to have on a kid's life. And particularly as a high school teacher, it's such a formative part of their life. Like, just to give them that confidence that they should find the thing that sort of makes them passionate and go for it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to pick into it, because I've never really thought about it.
And staying on, I love the term equity, equity, not equality. I think that is, I've not heard that before, and that sort of really made my ears prick up. When you think about equity and not equality, how do you, like, you was out of a school setting, how do you make that fair?
Mate, it's so tough. It's so tough because, and it's an education piece about the people who think it's unfair. Like, the easiest thing I can compare it to in my modern life, and you know this because you know plenty of lads that sort of on the surface look like me, e.g. fit and healthy, but actually we have complex disabilities. It is the same perception I get when I pull up in a disabled bay outside the shop and people tut and they go, what's he doing? Because on the surface, it looks unfair. It looks unfair that I'd be able to do that, but they don't understand the struggles that I go through on a daily basis. And if they know who I am, again, they'll probably see the shiny output, the dancing on Strictly, but not know that it's bloody hard for me to carry my shopping. Or, getting out of the car is a bit more difficult for me. So that's the problem, is actually it's really unfair that we look at certain people and go, well, they're getting more than I am, but they're starting from a different place. And so, like I say, you are making it fair, but I struggle with it all the time because I'm quite inclined to hide my disability. I'm quite inclined to just sort of muck through and not let people ask the question, essentially, because they've already made their mind up. And I just think that's where we're getting it wrong as a society, unfortunately, because I know for 100% you absolutely, kids who have dyslexia is not something that you can't that you'll ever get rid of. I've lived with it for the rest of my days. It sounds like a nothing disorder, but the fact of the matter is my brain doesn't work the way that every other human brain works. So I'm going to struggle at certain facets of my life. But give me the right tools, the right support, a little bit extra time in an exam, whatever it might be, then I will get the result that I deserve as a human being. Now, people will ask, how does that equate into the real world? Well, most of the time, what it equates to the real world is getting up earlier in the morning. You know, like we know lads, absolute high achievers who have complex disabilities, and the only way that they can have a level playing field in life is to get up an hour earlier, because that's how long it takes for them to get going. That's how long it takes to get dressed, get the shoes on, get the legs on. You know, we look at people that have complex mental health conditions, like ensuring that they have a workplace which works, because otherwise you're writing that person off. Like making those little adjustments. And again, people could look at somebody who suffers from PTSD, for example, and go, well, why is he allowed to stay at home today? And I'm not. And you're like, well, you're not going through what he goes through. And he would do anything he would do anything to be able to come into work every single day. Like I would do, you know me, Mo, I'd do anything not to have this disability, but it ain't going to happen. I'd have loved to have been born not dyslexic. Now, yes, it's led to who I am, and I'm not going to change it because I can't change it. But my God, I would have loved to have just had it easy.
I think it's going to be a perennial and eternal problem, trying to make things fair on a micro and macro level in life. It's a challenge throughout, and I think you make a good point with regards to education. It's a constant education piece to try and allow people to have an informed decision rather than what they let their eyes deceive them. Mate, I want to move forward, if I may, to the core, because yours wasn't what we would call a normal route, as in you were in the reserves to start. That's the training you went through. And why was it the reserves and not regular training?
Because I've been fortunate enough to get a place in uni. Like, and then I suppose if you sort of delve into my real want to go to university, like it was partly like it was a sensible box ticking exercise in terms of like I'd had my head down in education through school, and I wanted to just go there and make sure I got that piece of paper, which kind of steadied me well for the rest of my days. But I suppose part of the wanting to go to university is that at some points in my life, I would have never thought that was a possibility, I suppose. So sort of like, well, bloody well, I've earned the opportunity to do it. I better follow through. So I sort of gladly did that. But as I say, you know, I've been in the cadets. I had fallen in love with the Corps more than anything. It wasn't even a sense of falling in love with like military service. Now, yes, service was a part of it. I'd always been raised in a household where you served in some capacity, you helped others. So like that was something I wanted to do. And in fairness, I joined the Corps in 2005. Like if you looked at the sort of formative teenage years that I'd gone through, people think in fairness that like computer games and movies and stuff are influencing kids. Do you know what influenced me to join the Corps? Watching the news. It was watching lads in Iraq and Afghanistan, like, you know, like seeing news clips. I still clear as day can see the lads up in the mountains in Afghan back in 2001 and 2002. And of course, like the initial invasion of Iraq, like it was broadcast on Sky News live, you know what I mean? So like, I just remember that. But more importantly, I remember spending time as a cadet with bootnecks, with actual Royal Marines. And what I mean by that is we did this camp at Gairloch Head, which just sits above Faslane Naval Base. Probably know it well. It's Gotham, for 2 weeks, and it was awesome. But the best thing they did, except for having like the normal training team that was made up of like the hierarchy, that we had a captain, a warrant officer, and a sergeant from the Corps. They just brought lads up from FPG, from the Fleet Protection Group, and they were just normal Marines, normal corporals, just like, you know, bottom of the rung blokes like I eventually was. And it was hearing them talking to each other. It was hearing them talk about the things that they'd done, spinning bits as we called it. So telling the stories, the things that they'd done, just extraordinary things, whether it was, you know, on operations or exercises or whatever it was. But more importantly, it was the way that they spoke to each other. You could just tell that they were best mates. and that they would do anything for each other. And that was the thing which I wanted a part of. And yeah, I looked at these Green Berets, and they seemed like superheroes, absolute superheroes to me. So I wanted to see if I could earn one of those. But like I say, I had my place in uni, and it wasn't until somebody told me, listen, you can join the reserves. And I sort of, found out more about it. And I think the thing which sort of most got me over the line with it was the fact that if you do it through the reserve route, your training will take longer. It will be split up. It will be done in a different manner, but you will have to go and pass the commando course like everybody else. You'll have to go down periodically throughout your training and pass certain criteria tests. And that was the thing. I was like, right, well, if they're not cutting the standard, again, they might be adjusting for fairness, giving you more time to get there, but the standard remains the same for what you have to pass. And so that was a big driver on it. And then again, for the period in time that it was, so many blokes were coming and going from the regular corps to the reserves on such a regular basis at this point that basically I knew if I joined, I would end up in a regular corps and I would end up on operations in Afghanistan. We just knew that. You joined the corps in 2005. You knew that was going to happen, and it was something I was willing to do.
So it wasn't a tough decision to make then?
Not really, no. Of course you've got to, you do this throughout your career. You do this at the first time you ever walk out on patrol in Afghan. Like, you have to talk to yourself and go, this is happening. There are repercussions of joining the Royal Marines. You may end up injured, you may end up dead, you may da-da-da-da-da. And as I say, the first time you step out on patrol in Afghan, it's the same. It's like, do I have the confidence to take this first step? Does the risk merit the rewards, essentially? Now, by the point you're stepping out on patrol in Afghan, the rewards have already happened, actually. You're already in the corps. You're already living your absolute dream. And now this is the biggest risk, because this is the day that you're having to live by your decision that you'd made several years before. But yeah, as I sort of lay there, I remember I was actually lying on the grass overlooking Faslane Naval Base. The bombings in 7/7 had literally just happened. I remember I was lying there with one of my really close mates, just like blue skies above us, like looking down at it. And yeah, we both decided that moment pretty much right there and then that we would join the corps. He still had one more year at school, so he was delayed a year behind me, but the two of us went for it essentially. And yeah, actually, it was a really simple decision. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a decision which you continue to play out through your head when you're in training, because you're like, why the heck am I doing this to myself? But every single time when I did the calculation in my head of why am I doing this, because I want to be a Royal Marine Commander, because I want a Green Beret. That's the thing I'm going for, and nothing, least of all what I'm telling myself in my head, is going to stop me from doing it.
I think that's interesting, and it is actually, I smile not because of anything other than I often say to people that if your vision and desire is absolute, it doesn't matter what happens on the way to that, on that journey, because you've got a bloody mindedness to make it happen. If you think it's a good idea and it gets a bit hard, then likelihood is you're not going to achieve what you set out to achieve. But if you know what you want and there is nothing else in the world that will stop you from making that happen, then you will achieve it. It might take you longer than you thought, or there might be a few hiccups or bumps in the road or whatever it might be, but you're gonna get there.
Yeah, and those hiccups and bumps are the thing that actually in turn make it worth it. Because if those hiccups and bumps didn't exist, everybody would have a Green Beret and it wouldn't be worth anything.
So talking of hiccups and bumps, you had a pretty bad hiccup once you eventually passed out and earned the coveted Green Beret out in Afghan.
Yeah, that is a wonderful way of putting it.
It was a pretty significant hiccup there, eh?
Yeah, it was. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd been in the corps for a number of years now, and I'd had a brilliant career. Like, I'd been really lucky to just, to jump through the hoops that every bootneck does. Like, my career had just gone at the level you'd expect. I'd done my time as a general's duty Marine. I had been lucky enough to go on exercises with the US Marines and Norway and all these other things. Like, I'd managed to tick a lot of the boxes.
picked up my Lance Jack stripe a couple of years into it, and I picked up my an assault engineer's qualification. Like, it was just all going to plan. It was quite brilliant. And Afghanistan was absolutely the plan. It was like, right, yes, you're getting qualifications and you're training and all that sort of stuff. None of that means anything until you apply it, basically. It's the old, actor practicing the show 1,000 times and then never actually performing it. Like, that's what Afghan is. Now, yes, it's part of something much bigger. It's part of a, what I would almost call a humanitarian effort in that country to bring, peace and stability to, a very troubled country. But individually, as you say, it's very much about, you finding out whether you measure up to the standards which you think you've been measured to. We passed the tests, you've earned the badges, etc. But none of that is real until the bullets start flying or people start getting hurt, basically. But yeah, we were 2.5 months into the tour, and we were.
And a tour, your tour length was, just for people that are listening, 6 months.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So I was meant to be in Afghanistan for 6 months throughout the summer of 2011. So routinely, you would get 6 months is pretty much the tour time in Afghan, and then you hand over to the next lot, and so on and so forth. We were there for the summer. The summer is a really difficult period to be there. It's not because there's no easy time to be in Afghan. Right, this, Mo. Like winter is savage. It's cold. It is hard. It's battering. But on the flip side, the fighting season isn't on. So yeah, exactly. It might have been blue skies above us, but the poppy harvest comes and the fighting season comes, and things really ramp up. The casualty rate essentially ramped up during the summer months. But we were working in what was called the green zone in Afghanistan. So that is, people think of Afghan as like a desert country, and of course there's huge swathes of desert in it, but actually in the south along the Helmand River, that's where you find the green fertile soil that allows people to have a livelihood, because most of the people in that region are farmers. They're just poor ordinary farmers just trying to make a living, just trying to have the things in life that we pretty much take for granted, let's be honest. And in order for them to go about their business, the one thing they needed more than anything was security, because otherwise people are going to take advantage of them, essentially. Like all conflicts, when you actually trace the roots of causes, is power. It's people struggling over power, people taking advantage of the weak. And that's what we were trying to do, was allow people to stand up on their own 2 feet. And so that's why we found ourselves in this dense, green, fertile area. And we lived in these little checkpoints in the middle of it, in the heart of it, surrounded by Afghan villages, by farms, etc. And we were like policemen. That was our beat. That was the thing that we were meant to keep safe and allow people to go about their business. Like our main threat when we were there were improvised explosive devices. So those are like roadside bombs, they get called in the media, like they're sort of crudely made. I say crude, and you know this, Mo. They're crude because they're made out of household objects, but actually pretty sophisticated in the way that they targeted us. And it was a constant game of cat and mouse every time we came up with a way of defeating the object. Like they redesigned it, and so forth. But anyway, we got to a point in the tour where the area that we were in charge of was pretty safe. It had a thriving bazaar, kids were going to school, all the things that you sort of measure it by. And I remember I remember when we passed out of training, I got a letter from our commanding officer that spoke about, congratulating us that we've become Royal Marine Commandos and all that kind of stuff. But it had a line in it that said that don't rest on your laurels. And I remember that kind of knocking the wind out of my sails, because it was sort of like, yeah, you think you've done well, good on you, but you've still got to keep moving forward. You still you've got a lot to learn, is basically what he was saying. And we did. We're still mega wet behind the ear. You've gone from being the top recruit, that's you reach the pinnacle of recruit training, and whack, you're straight down at the bottom. And that green beret that you so coveted because you thought it would set you apart from everybody means nothing when everybody's got a green beret.
You're one of thousands now.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get me wrong, you're part of an amazing club, but you're just, within that context, you're one of thousands. And actually, as you say, it's the other badges and whistles that you've got to earn. But the reason I bring that up is because we were sitting in a situation where actually we had achieved what we needed to achieve within our local area. So why not just hunker down and survive the next 4 months? But that's just not how we work. That's resting on your laurels. That's not what the Corps does. So we had to push into areas, outside of our bubble and expand our bubble of influence, and that's what brought us into a part of the world called Loyman de Calais, which was a sort of village which was held by the Taliban. We were part of a much bigger operation, but we had one specific task of basically taking up a farming compound just south of the main village and hunkering down and taking the brunt of the enemy forces towards us. And so that it was kind of a distraction operation. While they were busy fighting us, other peaceful operations could go on around us. But within our area, we also identified what we thought was the bomb-making factory for our area of operations. And so my section was tasked with searching it and neutralizing it. And again, it's a pretty dangerous task to be given. If you're going to start poking around a bomb-making factory, it might not end well.
It's the hornet's nest, isn't it?
It's the hornet's nest. We're poking the hornet's nest, absolutely. But actually, on the flip side, what an incredible responsibility to be given. Basically, this is someone has deemed that you and the small team of guys are the right people for that task, essentially. And it's good work as far as I'm concerned. The world could do with one less bomb making factory. And so yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's sort of scary and all that sort of stuff. But God, did we go in proudly and get on with our job? Unfortunately, as you say, poke the hornet's nest. You get stung, and that's when that hiccup occurred. So whilst we were searching it, and we had done everything we could, like we had conducted a full search of the building. We had made it as safe as we possibly could, but in Afghanistan, you need to get lucky every single day, and the Taliban just need to get lucky like that one or two times, especially with IEDs. You just chuck those things anywhere you want, especially if you don't care about the consequences of who might step on them, e.g., the indiscriminate nature. If you don't mind that a kid might be the person that steps on it, or a farmer, then you just put them wherever you want, and so be it. And so, yeah, we triggered one of these things. It sent off an absolutely massive explosion, which unfortunately claimed the life of 3 blokes and further injured another 3. And I was one of them. I was just close enough to the blast that I wasn't caught by the sort of heat of the blast, so I didn't lose my legs or whatnot, but I was caught in all the frag that gets thrown off of it, and it pretty much bludgeoned me from head to toe. Pretty much everything from my knees up sustained some form of damage, and pretty catastrophic. I mean, but as you know, Mo, it should have killed me, but it didn't. And that's kind of, we can talk about the long-term effects of it and everything else, but that's the number one thing. Like when I talk about luck, what comes after the explosion? There is no luck after the explosion in terms of because my life was saved by young, well-trained, experienced Royal Marine Commandos. It was I went onto a helicopter, I went into the hospital with the finest medical care, etc. Luck's not in the picture at that point. That's hard work and graft of others. The only point in my story that is luck is the point at which that blast didn't kill me, because it should have. It bloody well should have.
What do you remember about the moments preceding the explosion?
So I have like little split shot images of the day, because I took a clap to the head, obviously. So like I can remember, if you took me to Afghanistan now and you put me in my checkpoint Toki, and told me to get to where the compound was, I've probably got enough little, memento jigsaw pieces that I could find from A to B. And then I can remember being in the compound and kind of just going, I just remember it being normal. That's the biggest thing. It was just so normal. Friday afternoon, 1 o'clock, we just had our lunch on patrol, waiting for it to kick off, in fairness, because we'd been, in sort of sustained firefights and kinetic, war fighting for about 5 days at that point. So we were really, ready for something to happen, but it still felt pretty normal. And then whack, the next thing I know, I'm just lying on my back in I just feel like I've been crushed, like so much pain, and just so helpless as well. Like, I went to try and help myself, but because my arms had pretty much been torn off, there's just nothing I could do for myself. So yeah, I just remember screaming, hoping that someone would come and help me.
How many of you were in that patrol?
So I think there was 10 of us on the ground, maybe 11. I mean, in essence, the best example I can give you of the enormity of the situation, as I say, 2 of the Marines were killed. Our Afghan interpreter later died in hospital. 2 of us were turned very seriously injured. So a bloke had lost his leg and whatnot, and I had all this catastrophic damage. There was a guy who died.
Sorry, mate. Who were the guys that died?
No. So Sam Alexander, MC, military cross winner from the tour 2 summers before. Just the best Marine I've ever met in my life, and just such a good bloke to have in your corner. Like, the confidence that he filled me with, that everything would be all right, basically, because just do what he's doing. Like, even at that simple level, you just try and conduct yourself like that bloke, you'll be all right. Absolutely just amazing. And then our troop commander, Ollie Augustin, who again was, young troop commander. He'd just passed out of training in December and come to the unit. And so, he's 5 months into his, his career as a Royal Marine, basically, when he was killed. And, we've met, Mo, what young bosses are like, particularly in the Royal Marines. Like, it's a seriously tough job. Like, you are leading some of the most experienced, most badass blokes in the world. And he was younger than I was, you know what I mean? And he was in charge. It's a really hard balance to strike, to be able to instill confidence in your men that you know what you're doing, that there are things you don't know what you're doing, but you will allow the experts in whatever field it is to have control over things, but the buck stops with him. And the decisions will be made by him. The most critical decisions will be made by him. And he just did it. He was just so bloody good at it. And he was just well liked. And yeah, he was walking the tightrope of being a young officer. It was bloody hard, but we'd have followed him into a bomb making factory. That's what we would have done.
And that's what you did.
Yeah, exactly.
Mate, I asked that question because I think it's important to allow their memories to live on at any given moment and opportunity. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're right, mate. And on that point, it's very, you're right. I'm so glad you did, actually, because sometimes I brush over it because essentially because of the guilt I feel, because I'm here and they're not. And with that, there comes a sort of, I never want to use their name in vain type thing. I remember writing to their families around Strictly time, because obviously when my story comes out, and it's in the media, their stories come out. And I don't want their names being used in vain. But, I was so reassured to get the answer back, which was, sing it from the rooftops, because, we want them to be remembered. So anyway, so yeah, we had the 3 blokes killed and the 2 injured, and then one other bloke who'd taken like a knock to the head. On any other day, you would have been like, all right, let's get this guy off the ground. He's a casualty and we need to deal with it. Because of the catastrophic nature and the number of casualties we had, they just looked at him and he looked back and was like, I better get on with this. And he just, he was part of the CASEVAC process. So
you had like 50% of your patrol then that worked out at.
Yeah. Exactly. Wow. Yeah, and that's that. Dealing with 5 casualties when there's just 5 blokes is one part of it. Not to get too much into it, but it looked like we were having a follow-up attack coming as well. So security continues as a priority. Oh, it was horrific. Now there was other call signs on the ground who made it to us as quick as they could.
Other patrols, you mean?
Other patrols were satelliting around us. So there was another 20 blokes on the ground nearby. 10 of them were held up by an IED incident of their own. So then there was another 10 blokes who were, I can't remember how far away they were, but we knew that the ground between them and us was extremely dangerous. We knew that it was open. We knew that it was likely covered in IEDs. But in credit to them, they ran as fast as they could to us. But it still took longer than you'd like. And when you're a bloke either lying there bleeding, or you're a bloke who is having to deal with this, it's like time slows down. So those, it was only 28 minutes before a helicopter came, but it might as well be 28 hours.
Do you remember much in between the explosion taking place and repatriation to the UK?
Yeah, so I remember again split seconds of the moments from being blown up to being on a helicopter, as I say, about 28 minutes. And the things I remember are the blokes on top of me. And again, my face had been crushed, so I'm only looking out of one eye at this point, because my other eye socket was damaged. And I'm in so much pain that I'm just kind of writhing around on the floor, just trying to get this pain out of me. I wasn't taking it well. And I remember actually thinking that. Because at one point I tried to suck it up, because we've all watched Bruce Willis in a movie, just go, get on with it. And I was not doing that. But then I remember thinking to myself, like, no, like this is the one time in your life you're allowed to scream. And as I said, I was just trying to get this pain out of me. But I remember the lads on top of me dealing with me. I really remember the point at which they left me because they had to go and deal with the other casualties. I remember them saying that to me. I remember being terrified that they would leave, but it was quite significant to hear that because it gave me a sense of the enormity of what was going on around me, because I could just hear the panic and the screams and whatnot. I remember hearing that the wheels were up at Bastion, so that meant that the helicopter was en route. And so I remember going back into my head, like we did, like I talked about when we were Royal Marine recruits, and having that make it to the helicopter. You just need to make it to the helicopter. It's en route. 20 minutes, it's going to be here, and that was the thing I focused on, and nothing, no amount of pain, the darkness coming, whatever it might be, just make it. And so I remember that, and then I remember the point of being put on the helicopter. I just remember the downdraft coming, and my mate sort of over the top of me to try and stop some of that, dirt from going into my wounds, etc. And I remember the very last thing I remember was getting put on the helicopter and opening my eye, looking up at the bloke, and saying, "Thank you, mate. Thank you for saving my life." Like just knowing that I'd probably made it at that point. Because we knew that if we made it to a helicopter, we had like a 96% chance of survival.
Yeah, those MERT teams, the medical emergency response teams, were unbelievable. And I think probably just worth describing the facilities on those helicopters as to the reasons why it's 90+% chance, because they're incredible. They were incredible.
Yeah. So there are two call signs that might come and get you. So you will either be picked up by the British medical evacuation team, as you said, the MERT, which is a Chinook helicopter. So those twinned rotas, heavy lift helicopters, which have essentially a surgery in the back of it. And we know blokes that have had surgeries which general surgeons in most hospitals around the country would get nervous about doing. They have had those conducted on them in the back of helicopters. The record for getting from the back at the time, from being on the helicopter to being asleep under anaesthetic, I think was 57 seconds at that time. So that's why you knew if you made it to helicopter, you would be all right and you'd be put to sleep and the pain would go. Unfortunately, I was actually picked up by the Americans, and so they had what we called call sign Pedro, two Black Hawk helicopters, much smaller, much less medical facilities, but much quicker, and also willing to go. And this is not about what I'm about to say is not about fear, but they were far more willing to go into dangerous areas, but predominantly because of that they were lighter, more agile. They were equipped, and they had weapons. A Chinook is a flying double-decker bus. Like, it's a big target. If that area isn't secure, you're not just losing a helicopter. You're losing, this incredible surgery and all the doctors and whatnot that are on the back of it.
The factors surrounding availability, but also appropriateness for the task that's been called in. So
the biggest thing for us was speed. Like, my life at this point wasn't hanging in the balance so much that I needed a surgery. I needed to get out of there quick. Mine was a death by 1,000 cuts. So like, rather than having your leg gone and you're going to bleed out like within the next 5 minutes or even minute, mine was, you are full of holes, and if we don't start dealing with this in an appropriate manner, your life is gone. Plus, infection will set in, and your life will get taken. Just as happened to our interpreter, who died of sepsis in the hospital later. So they picked me up and they got me out of there real quick. I was conscious for the entire flight back. I was put to sleep on the operating table in Camp Bastion within 1 hour of the blast going off. I was flown back to the UK within 48 hours. But at this point, I'm still in a coma, and I didn't wake up until a week later. So whilst I remember little parts of the beginning, and your senses are still taking some of that in, even when you're asleep, in reality, I closed my eyes and opened them, and a week of my life had gone, and I'd flown to the other side of the world.
Incredible. And you arrived in Selly Oak in Birmingham, is that where it was?
I went to the Queen Elizabeth in Birmingham. So Selly Oak was partially shut down by this point. So Selly Oak being the British military hospital at that time. The outpatient facilities were still up and running. So now and again, you got put in an ambulance and taken around a corner to there to get appointments and whatnot. But we were some of the first casualties through the brand new Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which itself was a NHS hospital, but with an NHS staff working. With a military staff working within it. So if you were to have a traumatic accident in your car near Birmingham, you would come through the hospital and be seen by the same surgeons that saved my life. So yes, 90% of the people, surgeons anyway, that worked on me were military surgeons. But some of them were NHS, and 50-50 on the nurses, etc. It was just they were feeding off one another and learning best practices from each other. But it was an unbelievable place. And just, at the height of that summer in particular, we filled up ICU with blokes that weekend, pretty much, not just off that incident, but several other incidents that were going on around us. And it was just running at such a tempo that was pretty remarkable. Like, when I look back at it now, it kind of makes you realize the extraordinary things that were being done by surgeons, even the extraordinary things that were being done by like small charities, like the Cape Lady. The Cape Lady. This is a woman who,
Catholic.
off her own back, Catholic Cape Lady, off her own back, set up a charity to bring in. In fact, it wasn't even a charity time; it's just her bringing freshly made cakes to us every Wednesday on the ward. Like, these amazing little things that people, the response that ordinary people gave, makes me realize, bloody hell, I lived through a war. Like, it was a remarkable piece of history that I was living in, because I'd never broken a bone, never had a stitch, never experienced anything like it. And now you're at the forefront of medical science, and, as I say, the forefront of the positivity and the goodwill of others.
JJ, you wake up in hospital after about a week since point of incident. Can you remember your initial thoughts when you woke up and you were like, right, I'm in you were conscious and of where you were? Can you remember what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, you open your eyes, you're staring at the ceiling. My head's in a neck brace. My arms are up in sort of big, metalwork and whatnot. The first moments were okay because the pain hadn't set back in yet. The days that would come after were so dark, so hard. It was a balance between
When you say pain, you mean physical pain or mental pain?
Physical pain. Every single inch of my body being so uncomfortable, like so much pain that the only thing that could even make you feel remote, like the pumping you full of so many drugs, and you're having to deal with the medical, the side effects of that, the hallucinations, in some ways the trauma that you're sort of re-experiencing because it's just so psychedelic. But you don't really understand that at the time, because it's that you can't separate real from fake at that point. But the pain was so bad, and the only thing that could ever make me feel even sort of remotely comfortable for 30 seconds was having the sheets on my bed changed, because it just for a little second you felt some sort of humanity. some sort of piece, and then you just sweated them back out, and you just writhed around in pain. But as I say, for the first few minutes, it was kind of all right. I hadn't set in yet for some reason. I remember sort of knowing that I'd been injured, knowing because I piece together what I could remember what happened to some degree. I'd been hurt. I was in a hospital. I thought I was in Camp Bastion. I thought it was maybe 4 hours later. Took them a while to convince me that I was in the UK and all this time had passed. I see my family. I remember trying to sort of act like it wasn't a big deal because it was sort of, I don't know, I just tried to play it down. Making small talk with like my brother-in-law, like, how's your golf? Have you had a nice summer? Like my wife was meant to be in Poland at the time, visiting her family. So my first words to her were, what are you doing here? You're meant to be in Poland. Not what she wanted to hear.
Can you remember what she said to you?
She essentially just, I'm putting words in her mouth, but she pretty much called me an idiot in the sense that she was like, you're not getting how bad this is what she was saying to me. Because I was like, when they told me I hadn't lost my legs, I thought I'd be back in Afghan, like in a week. Because that was our understanding at the time. You got blown up, you lost your legs, that's it, you're a casualty, your career's over. Everything else doesn't exist. We didn't know the complex injuries that were being sustained. So if it's just scratches, then patch them all up and I'll get back. And there was a part of me that for the weeks that I had in hospital, I was feeling guilty about not being an Afghan. I knew that the lads were down a bloke, or several blokes at this point. That meant that they were having to work harder. That meant that they were getting less sleep. I thought I'd abandoned them, basically. And so, yeah, it took my family, my missus in particular, and the surgeons a good while to convince me that this was a lot worse than I thought it was. And as I say, that's not even about the pain and stuff I was thinking. It was more just the consequences, the long-term consequences of this disability took a long time to set in.
Do you think the denial was because of that? Because you didn't want to deep down admit that to yourself and accept, or not admit, but accept that your life is going to be different now? Yeah.
I mean, part of it is I couldn't even see it because my head was in this neck brace of staring up at the ground. It probably wasn't until about 7 or 8 weeks later, I got out of the hospital bed for the first time. And I went into the bathroom and I saw myself in the mirror and I saw the extent of my injuries. And I cried. But I remember thinking, holy shit, how lucky am I? How close did I come that this is how you could end up being, but still be here? Because, until you see it in the naked truth of the reality of my injury up close, how can a human being survive, basically, is what I was thinking.
And what were your injuries?
Yeah. So my arms has more or less come off. So my right elbow, the joint is completely destroyed. And again, the thing that Bruce Willis doesn't show you when he gets shot in the arm is that it's not just a bullet hole. It's not just a wound to the bone or to the muscle. It's bone, it's muscle, it's nerves, it's blood supply. The nerve damage in my right arm took 3 years to heal, but not entirely. It took 3 years to get to the point where it would no longer get any better, but it took a nerve recovers at 1 millimeter a day. So they can measure that and go, you've got this amount of millimeters worth of nerves needing to heal.
But what I will say though, mate, just quickly on that, is that if that hadn't have happened, the lads wouldn't have been able to have a laugh at your expense when you asked you to put your hand above your head and see if you could hold it. Do you remember?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So the morale that brings everybody else is a good thing, as a silver lining.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my other hand had lost 2 fingers and the other ones had come off. Lads come and visit me in hospital. What do they bring me? Cadbury's chocolate fingers. My thighs were full of holes, full of infection, full of shrapnel and frag. They took 99% of it out, but I had a piece dug out the other day, 9 years later. My face had been crushed, my neck had been broken, my eardrums were burst, just everything had been clattered. And then the bits that weren't damaged which was mainly the flesh that sat underneath my body armor and my internal organs. In fairness, I didn't have any internal injuries really within my core. Those are the bits they're going to use to repair you. So then they start eyeing up, your torso, because that's what they need to stick onto your elbow. Little bits of, muscle and fascia and things out of various parts of my body have been taken and added to this sort of patchwork quilt. So yeah, I mean, when I looked at myself for the first time, it just didn't look like there was a part of my body that didn't have a hole in it, basically.
Mate, I want to just fast forward a little bit, if I may,
yeah.
to Invictus Games, because no, I don't mean to do your recovery journey up until that point a disservice. How important was the Invictus Games to you? How pivotal was it, the London Games in 2014 to you and your family?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways you're right to fast forward, because the fact of the matter is the recovery part that comes before that is pretty mundane. It is, and that's why Invictus was so important. It was learning everyday functions again. It was learning how to put your clothes on and feed yourself. It was learning how to use my hands that, again, hadn't fully recovered or hadn't even finished building by this point. It was moving marbles from one tray to another for hours of the day. And it was pretty dull. It was made interesting by the people that you were there with, the guys that you were surrounded by. It was tough, as you say, because I spent a lot of time away from my family during it. And my wife is going through struggles of her own. This is the acceptance of having the man that she loved, the young guy that she'd fallen in love with, this highly able Royal Marine Commando, and now being my carer. Like, there's nothing sexy about that, basically. And so Invictus was so important for every reason that I've kind of dipped into there. Like, it was an exciting piece of rehabilitation. It was, sport is an amazing physical recovery tool, but it became the reason to get out of bed. That was something that I'd chosen to do. Like, it was cool. It was I'm going to get really good at riding a bike, rather than I'm going to get really good at putting my t-shirt on in the morning. Like, that's just dull. And then the whole wrapper that sat around Invictus, that opportunity to pull a uniform on, as you kind of mentioned earlier, accepting the thing I did before was gone. I wasn't going to pull a military uniform on and be proud of that anymore, per se. This is a new uniform that I could pull on and be proud of for a whole new host of reasons, but for the same set of values. And then, what it meant for my family, my friends, the people that I'd recovered with, for us all just to be able to come together, essentially, and put some of it to bed, just to be able to look at it and go, particularly the moment, that's a spoiler alert, the moment where I got my medal, that was the moment where that was the end of the story.
But they did slow down for you, though. They slowed down for you because and in fairness, I remember being on the cycling. I remember being on the cycle with Jane, and there was and it is an iconic photo of that games of Invictus where the three of you crossed the line together. And I want you to tell the story about because there's two Marines and a army lad, wasn't there? There was quite a funny story beforehand, but that is an iconic photo. And I remember the intent of the games was competition, and it wasn't really like that. That finish wasn't liked by the organisers. And I remember Jane and I, who were organising the cycle, saying, "No, this is not about you. This is about them. And if that's what they chose to do, because you're providing the equity, as you call it, not to make it equal, and that's what they wanted to do." So.
Yeah, you're right. Because the thing about Invictus is the outcome. The outcome is the important thing. And that's the thing which in many ways you set. If the medal's important to you, then you do everything you can to get that medal. And as you say, they make it fair and they level things out and they create criteria for that to happen. But actually the thing that we wanted, I suppose, for want of a better word, was just closure. It was our moment to just reflect on it. Now, it sounds like we planned it, but we didn't. But that's what innately happened because, long story short, we'd done the time trial in the morning. I'd won the bronze. Rob Cromie Hawk, the Royal Engineer, had won the gold. Vicey, the other Royal Marine, had come fourth, and we'd been split by an American. So we all knew that physically we had a good chance of winning a medal within this competition. But the race in the afternoon was an individual race, but like all sort of competitive cycling of that style, road cycling, you can work together. You can draft off one another. You take your turn at the front, etc. You form your alliances. Now, there were 3 Brits, so we formed an alliance, essentially. But that is to get yourself in as best a position as you can to then leave the other blokes behind and do the winning. And yeah, we just had this click moment, I think, without saying much about it. And we all just knew individually that none of us deserved it more than the other bloke. Like, all of us had just been dealt a crap set of cards at one point in their life. All 3 of us had been injured in Afghanistan in a bomb blast. Now, that's not true for everybody in Invictus. There's wounded, injured, and sick amongst it. But it just so happened that, we very much knew what one another had been through. Having said that, our disabilities were very different. One had a brain injury. Vicey had a bit of everything, because actually he'd essentially had a stroke as a result of the blast that he was involved in. But also a lot of other physical wounds. Lost his leg as well, and then obviously my catastrophic physical injuries. But the repercussions had been the same, and the thing that we needed was just to cross the line and to be able to stand on the podium together, arm around one another. Now, we didn't know whether they would give us medals, disqualify us. Who knew? We didn't care. All we knew is that we were crossing that line together. And yes, as you so well put it, once the dust had settled a little bit, people realised that the only thing you could do with that was to give us all gold medals, because that's what it's about. That none of us would have been in that position to win that gold medal without one another. And I'm not talking about in the race itself, which technically we were, because we helped each other, but the training that had led up to it, the recovery before that, we would have never got to that position. And that was the thing. That was that crossing the finish line, being on the podium, looking up at my wife, Vicey's wife, the bloke that saved my life in Afghan, and just knowing that all that was in some way kind of behind us all. Like, this thing was just done with, because look what I've managed to do. It has not stopped me doing this, so why should it stop me doing anything else?
I know for a fact that Rob, when he crossed the line, was relieved. And the reason why he was relieved, because he said to me that you guys, towards the end of that race, had planned to cross the line together, as you eventually did, but he did not trust you two at all. He thought to himself that these bootnecks are gonna see me off here, and I'm gonna end up with a bronze, and that they're saying it to get gold and silver.
Yeah, I mean, let's say there's a healthy competition within inter-services, isn't there? But no, let's say that's what was driving us behind it all. Just because how could I? Invictus is such an important moment for me moving forward as well. It wasn't just about what I'd come behind. I would then go on to realise how important it was for everything that's come after it. If it wasn't genuine, if it wasn't, if it wasn't as it appeared, then how could I take any motivation from it? If it was fake, then you're living a lie, and you'll never be able to use it as your driver. You'll never be able to use it to push you forward and make you succeed in life, because it just means nothing. It's like I was saying earlier, it's those lumps and bumps. It's that how difficult it is to become a Royal Marine Commando. That's what gives it the value. And that's why once you've got it, you then realize that that you can apply what you've learned from it to so many different facets of your life. And that's what that moment was for me.
Mate, the Invictus, as you've just discussed, was a consolidation of recovery, but it also segues neatly into, it built a foundation as a launch pad into the career that you now have got. Because I remember the media thing sort of came about as a result of Invictus. So can you just explain the details surrounding that?
Yeah, well, it all started, funnily enough, and you'll remember this well, at the Royal Marines Rehabilitation Triathlon. So that was an event which you'd put together with some of the PTIs from the Royal Marines. And it says what it does on the tin. It's a triathlon that we used as part of our recovery. And it was one of the first times that I'd sort of done competitive sport, essentially. And so, cycling was obviously a big part of that. But the other thing that happened at that point was that was the very beginnings of Invictus. That's when Prince Harry came to visit the event itself and sort of get the blueprint for what they could take forward into Invictus. I don't even think Invictus had a name at the time. I think it was just it was going to be a larger sports recovery event. And so that's the first time I met him. And it's the first time that anyone put a camera in my face and sort of told me to talk about it. And I remember sort of two things, essentially. One was I did an interview. It's going to sound so Chad, but and God, I mean, how shallow of me. But the lady that had interviewed me put the microphone down, turned to the guy holding the camera, and just went, "That was media gold." And I don't know if she meant for me to hear it, but in my head, it was, it wasn't even that it sort of made me feel big or anything like that, but it made me go, "Oh, actually, I've clearly got an innate ability to do this." And it's what we're sort of going back to earlier. Like,
dropping off. It's
finding those skill sets. Yeah, finding those skill sets that you have, that have intrinsically come to you or you've developed or whatever it might be. And I went, well, that didn't take me much effort. And she seemed really happy with the result. Maybe there's something in this. And what would happen next, as I say, was when I met Prince Harry and explained the vision for the games. Now, yes, it was meant to be a recovery tool for us, but the other thing that he wanted it to be was something that the outside world could look into and take motivation from. But he made it very clear that none of that worked unless we told our stories, because those were the stories that were inspiring me day to day, were the blokes that I was surrounded by. But the outside world didn't really know what was going on. And so he was like, "You need to tell these stories." And so, yeah, he asked me if I was willing to be open, honest, and tell my story. And so that got me sort of involved in the coverage, got me involved in all the sort of mad media circus. And when the dust settled from Invictus, I loved the sport, I loved competing, I loved all those things. But actually, the thing I've really enjoyed was being part of the broadcast of it. And so that's what enthused me to ask the question and try and get involved. And there I was, sort of with a route in. The door had creaked open slightly, and I got my foot in, and I was now it was, do everything I could to try and make this a possibility. And that's the thing. That's it. When you wake up from Invictus on the Monday morning, for me, I wasn't an athlete anymore. What was I going to be? And I wanted to become a broadcaster, basically. And as I say, my continued motivation in that, in fairness, was I want to tell these amazing stories to people. And as you know, because you were there with me, the biggest step forward after that was the Rio Paralympics. So many of my mates were going to the Rio Paralympics, and it was like, I want to go with them. It'll be amazing crack. But I just feel like I can tell their story better than anybody else. And so I want the opportunity to do that. And obviously that's why we did a feature with all the military athletes that went to Rio. And also Dave Henson, when he won his bronze medal. I was there in the stadium, witnessing it firsthand, and I had him in the studio with me, once the dust had settled. And it was just the realization of a dream that I was getting the opportunity to present a major sporting event, yes, but more importantly, I was getting the opportunity to tell these incredible stories.
That sounds like it's quite easy to do. That you went to Channel 4, and it was Channel 4 at the time, wasn't it? That covered the Rio Games. But I remember the journey to get. You don't just walk into broadcasting studios and go, "Hi, I'm here to work for you." You have to test. You're tested. And I remember speaking to you before you went to there was a test event at the London Stadium. Do you remember that? There was do you remember that was one of your that was one of your
the anniversary games.
Yeah, that's one of your first sort of trials, as it were.
Yes. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Like I brush over it because it does sound like that's how it works. Because it sounds like it makes sense, because it does make sense. It makes sense that Channel 4 would employ me to go and present on the games where actually there's a good cohort of military athletes, and here's a guy that's got an in with it, etc. Like, it makes sense on paper.
And sorry,
but I could be.
Oh, sorry. The reason why I wanted to say that was because I don't want people to think that because you're injured, you were gifted something. That's not how it is. You still have to earn the right to be successful.
Yeah.
It wasn't because you know, we've listened to an incredible story thus far about what happened to you. And it's not, oh, poor JJ, let's give him a job. That wasn't how it went down. You still had to earn that right as much as anybody else would have done.
No. So first of all, let's say I had this in, but what I had was experience, a life experience that I could bring to it. So to this point, I'd already, I'd earned 10, I've been 7 or 8 years since I joined the Corps and had all these experiences, become disabled. And everyone I was going up against to try and get a job at Channel 4 in the Paralympics had just as remarkable a story. They'd all been Paralympic athletes. They had lived through catastrophic injuries of their own. So like we were all, nothing was a given. And then the other thing, that people don't see and I kind of forget is that to hone your craft as a presenter, what you need more than anything is air miles. And most of that comes from standing up in old folks' homes and talking to 20 old ladies, or doing radio interviews and bits of news or whatever it is for free. So you're learning your craft there. And then yes, I got this glimmer of an opportunity at the anniversary games in 2015 to present something for Channel 4, albeit very small, not live or anything like that. But within that, it was it was going on television, and I'd never done this before. And you could easily turn around at that point and go, well, I'm not qualified to do this. This is out of my reach. But that's why I went for it, because it was just outside of my reach. I was just uncomfortable enough with it. When I talk about luck earlier, like a lot of people would tell you that luck is when an opportunity presents itself and you're ready for it. And that's what it was. I had readied myself in many other ways to get to this point. The opportunity was there, but there was 10, 15 people all running at it. I still had to win the competition, essentially. Now, it wasn't a competition, it's not like that's not how telly works. Well, X Factor does, but you're earning your right as a job like anybody else, and you're learning new skills, new trades, improving, etc. And that never stops. That never stops within telly, because there's always someone waiting to take your job away from you, like every single day. The moment you relax at all in it, you don't deserve to be there, quite frankly, because somebody else is going to come and take it, and quite rightly they should. So yeah, I mean, thankfully, the one thing I will say, that the unique thing about my opportunity was I was technically still in the Royal Marines at this point. I was going through my rehabilitation was capping off, but I was going through my resettlement period with the Corps, and they gave me the freedom and support to be able to pursue those opportunities. Whereas if I'd had to go and earn a living, etc., then I wouldn't have had the place to take the risk. I wouldn't have had the place to take the risk, because it's a risky industry to find yourself in and try and get started in. But yeah, I mean, it was just, the other thing was as well, just to finish it off, was it was kind of not scattergun, but it was sort of like, one of the other things that happened is the Invictus Games came back in Orlando in 2016. And when I went to work on those games for the BBC, my role was very small within it. So I found 4 or 5 different jobs there to do. So I became an ambassador to the games, and I was part of the opening ceremony and spoke within that presentation. I worked in field presenting, it's American sport, so they've got the guys that have got the microphones and are getting the crowds G'd up, etc. I went and did that for them. Again, unpaid, completely unexperienced, could have easily had a crowd of 2,000 people just laugh at me, but I just went for it. So it was looking for these opportunities to learn a skill, but also develop confidence, so that when the opportunity actually came, I was ready for it.
You have got an incredible story, and again, I don't want to fleet over anything, but I would like to fast forward to Strictly, because I cannot talk to you without getting some inside in for my daughter who loves the show big time. So it's probably just piecing that together. So Channel 4 moved to BBC, Commonwealth Games. I remember there's other fantastic shows that you've worked hard and privileged enough to present on.
Yeah, I mean, I became a broadcaster. That's how I viewed it. I came back from the Rio Paralympics, and I kind of went, okay, I love that. I want to do more of it. I want to do more sport. I want to do everything. And so, yeah, you know, I continued working on some programming with Channel 4, but the BBC were very lucky, or very, very fortunate, sorry, to come my way and offer me opportunities to work on a whole different number of platforms at the bottom, you know, and work my way up. But again, learn my craft, learn my skills, and get the air miles in.
So the opportunity for Strictly comes along.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen you dance in America. It's pretty terrible. It was, you know, obviously under some influence of alcoholic beverages. I'd have to give you that as a mitigation. So Strictly opportunity comes along. Did you grab it? Did you? Excuse the pun. Did you grab it with both hands, or did you?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, with 1.5 hands.
1.5 hands.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Because it's two things. First of all, yeah. If you just listen to the first part of this podcast and listen to the part where I'm a Royal Marine, and then you skip to the end, it was like, how is he in Strictly now? It makes no sense. But actually, because I've gone away and become a TV presenter and become, you know, one of the things I tried to do is ensure that I am a TV presenter first and foremost, and then my disability, and then my career within the Marines. That gives me the knowledge and insight into certain things that I present. But it's not the disabled TV presenter JJ Chalmers. Yeah, I am a TV presenter who has a disability. It's not the former Royal Marine TV presenter. It's a TV presenter who is a Royal Marines veteran. So again, I Strictly somehow became a natural progression within my career. So the opportunity sort of, as you say, you know, was earned, and, you know, it still falls in your lap, because there still comes a phone call when somebody goes, it's happening, do you want to do it? And honestly, think about it. If somebody came to you, and I suppose take the telly bit out of it, because people get embarrassed about being on TV, etc., blah, blah, blah. I don't, because it's what I do for a living. So that's fine. So you can take that bit out of it. If I came to you and said, here's an opportunity to do something, like whatever it might be, that's outside of your comfort zone. So here's an opportunity to learn to dance, and you're going to do it with one of the best dancers in the world. You're going to do it 5 days a week for like 8 to 10 hours every day, like whatever that would be. You would be mad to turn that opportunity down to learn a skill like that.
I'll do it.
You would like, and if you wouldn't, you'd have to. I would say you need to go and have a word with yourself, because that's just. Yes, don't get me wrong. There were, particularly with the series, because I had spent time with my family, so it's 3 months with my family. There are repercussions, there are struggles within it. You know, Strictly, again, it's on telly. Now, that doesn't bother me, but it would bother some people. The limelight and the sort of media that sits around it, that can be a bit troubling, a bit difficult to deal with. But the pure facts and figures of the opportunity that you're being given, you've got to take it. You've got to go for it. And even those moments when you step out on the dance floor, and it could be terrifying, I suppose. There's 11 million people watching you, and you've got to get it right, if nothing else. Actually, just look at it and just think how lucky I was to be doing what I was doing. And again, there's that word luck, but like how fortunate I was to actually get to do this. Just amazing.
How hard was the training?
Yeah, so tough. Like you walk in on a Monday, and you just know nothing, and that doesn't matter if you danced the week before. The dance you're doing this week is brand new. Yeah, you know, once you're 5 weeks in, you've got a couple of nuts and bolts in your toolbox that you kind of remember and bring forward, but none of it's easy.
So you've got 5 days to learn a new dance.
Well, you've really only got 4 days to learn it, actually. You've got Monday to Thursday, where you can go into a dance studio and you can do as there was like a minimum criteria of hours you had to do, but I don't even know what that was. The reality was I'd moved away from my family. I was living in London. If I wasn't training every second of the day that I could, and my body would allow me to, then I was wasting the opportunity, and it was a disservice to my family, quite frankly. So I would go in on a Monday morning, and we were doing 8 to 10 hours every day, Monday to Thursday. Then Friday, you go into the ballroom, the actual strictly ballroom, and you get 3 run-throughs. It's called camera blocking. So it's actually more for the cameras to learn where you'll be, and so they can figure out, where they're going to point and do the sort of the effects and whatnot. And then on the Friday, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. That's the day. It's like you go in, you got like a timetable. It's literally like physio, hair and makeup, costume, spray tan, rehearsal, like the lot, mate. It's amazing.
I love that spray tan. Awesome.
Spray tan.
I'm in.
You're in. So that's your Friday. And then on the Saturday, it's very similar. But you get 2 run-throughs with the band for the very first time. Then you do a dress rehearsal. So you do the whole show, practice in full outfit, and then you do the actual show on a Saturday night. So you've really got 4 days to learn it. You turn up on a Monday morning, and the first couple of days in particular are just your brain. It's how much your brain can take rather than how much your body can take. Because you're just learning those steps, learning this new method. Just, it seems impossible. And you're like, I've got to do this in front of 11 million people in like 3 days' time. This is never going to happen. What am I doing? And also, particularly as you move through the program, you remember how good it feels towards the end of the week when you've actually got it and you're actually dancing and you're actually enjoying it. Whereas Mondays and Tuesdays just felt like it was week 1, day 1 in the core. It was like being in the foundation block, first bit of training when you're just like, I don't know anything. Whereas, like I say, by Friday, you're basically, by Thursday, you pretty much should be at a stage where, at least for the afternoon, you're just running it, doing it like 3 times back to back, no mistakes, you make mistakes, start again, whatever it was. So it is physically tough because you're doing 8 to 10 hours of exercise every day. Then you're coming home and you're, stretching, you're having a bath. I had an infection in my right leg, so I'm having to deal with that as well. So I'm kind of having to come home and drain the wound and do various bits and pieces of pain relief and things like that. And then pick yourself up and do it all again. And then hopefully on Saturday night, get told that you get to come back and do it for another week. It's mad.
How hard was the choreography to create because of your injuries?
I think only with hindsight I can really appreciate just how challenging it was, not just for me, but probably even more so for my dance partner. So I was with the amazing Amy Dowden, who's just the best. She was just an incredible dancer, an incredible choreographer, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that really, just made me, put her in such high regards is that she's suffered with Crohn's disease since she was 9 years old. And so she's had this chronic illness, which has at every corner tried to hold her back. Every opportunity that sort of presents itself, it's always at least lurking there or flaring up and getting in the way. And still, she pounded on through. And people were telling her it's never going to happen because of that. And instead of that being her greatest weakness, it's actually her greatest strength. It's the thing that makes her who she is. It's the thing that, not in this defines her way, because she's barely even spoken about it up to this point, but in her head, it's the thing that makes her just that bit more determined than other people. That little bit ready to go further. And so when you're dealing with someone that's got that mindset, you're off to an absolute winner. And so she got it. She just got the whole fact that there were days that I would come in and I wouldn't be full fitness, but we had to do something. We had to work around it, whatever it might be. And then in terms of the actual choreographing, at the beginning, she had no idea, because none of us had any idea. We just don't know what my body could and couldn't do. So each week we would learn something new. And if anything, it kind of sped up the choreographing process, maybe by like week 3 or 4. She was literally choreographing with her hand in her pocket, her right hand, because she knew that my right arm is pretty much no use whatsoever. So at least that meant, because the thing is, if you get to a certain point in the choreographing, And, it's like, and then I want you to tip your hat to me with your right arm or something like that. It's not just, oh, my right arm doesn't work, can I use my left instead, or whatever it might be. That doesn't just change that one step. It changes the whole way you've moved into that moment of choreographing and probably what comes after. So she has to unpick maybe 10 or 15 seconds worth of the dance and reconstruct it and put it back together. So there was all that going on. But in fairness, one of the things that she really did so well, especially once she understood my disability and where it wasn't, where my strengths and weaknesses lied, it was finding a style of dance that's set within, you're given a different category of dance, the waltz, the Viennese waltz, the paso doble, finding which thread within that would play to my strengths the best. So, for example, the paso doble, generally speaking, you have flamenco style. Look at me talking about bloody dance here, mate. Can you imagine it? Flamenco style, which is really, they talk about flamenco arms. So it's, using a lot of arm movement. So she instantly knows he's not doing any of that. So that basically puts you into the matador style of doing it. So that's like, we're pretty much pigeonholed into having to do a set of choreography that sits with that. However, one big part of that is learning how to use the matador's cape. So she was like, yeah, we're going to go down this route, but you've got to swing a cape around your head, with one of your arms. We're going to figure out which one it's going to be, and I'm going to teach you it. So it was amazing how she would sort of push me in. And just, to go one step further, the best example I can give you is when we did the jive in week 4. People who saw it will remember it as the week that I wore my uniform from the Royal Marines, which the whole other story in itself and just an awesome one. But the reason that happened wasn't because it was like, let's put JJ in his uniform. That'll be a cool thing to do. The reason it actually happened was that modern jive is really energetic and involves a lot of hands, arms, full body movement. And again, some of that is just off limits to me. So she found the style of jive dancing from the Second World War that was done by soldiers. And it was really it was all done down like the British Legion halls. And it was it's still jive. It's kind of a Lindy Hop style. And as I say, there's a little bit less, at least arms in it. And a lot more of it is all about your legs and whatnot. And generally speaking, that's what she did. She was just like, we're going to throw footwork at you all day long. Because, from the waist up, it ain't that great. So we just do footwork. So that led, as I say, to doing that style of dance, which led to the song The Bugle Boy, which led to, this whole, narrative of me wearing my uniform. But again, it happened because of her identifying where my weakness was and where my potential strength was, and then creating an entire, not just a dance, but an entire character that sat around it. So like, what I'm saying is, it was really tough, and it was tougher than I even appreciated at the time. But in some ways, it also created opportunities, because it's that sort of, it's the cracks in the wall that let the light through, and that just gives it, something different.
I loved it, and I thought you were brilliant, mate. Knowing how bad you are at dancing as well, I thought you were incredible, and the challenges that you've come through to be there, and that's why I think it's important to document your story in context to that, because a lot of people only know you from that show. But I'd like to just move into one final area, and we've discussed macro success and macro hiccups as well, but it's the micro level in terms of family. So in that time frame, you've got 2 beautiful children, and it's really interesting when I speak to people about interactions at home. How, from that hiccup in Afghanistan, does that affect home much? Do you think about it a lot?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, part of it, as you'll know yourself, is that being a father is relentless, particularly during these lockdown days. So sometimes your body and your brain doesn't even have time to appreciate just how difficult and complex it is. And that's true for everybody, because you just got to get on with it. So in some ways, it's very good at, here's me having just had an operation 3 weeks ago, and a bit of shrapnel dug out of my leg. And I stayed in hospital for a week. And then it was sort of like, all right, go home and take it easy. And I was like, I've got 2 kids at home. Like, there isn't really easy. It just doesn't work like that. And I suppose, yeah, I mean, there's still things that get me every day in terms of, can't tie my shoelaces, but actually the things I really notice. So every time I pick my daughter up, she's getting heavier and heavier, and I go, the day is going to come sooner than it will for everybody else that I won't be able to pick her up anymore. It is the moments when I'm putting them in the car seat and it's cold outside and my hands just aren't working. They've just stopped working because of the circulation so poor in them. And I'm like, I'm not going to get my living kids in the car here. Like, what am I going to have to do? Ask a stranger to come and buckle them up? Get in, warm my hands up. So these things occur on a pretty regular basis. Some of them, as I say, take care of themselves because you've got no other choice but just to grin it and get on with it. But there are points where you are stopped in your tracks by the reality of living with a disability. But as I made clear very early on, that I don't view this as ability versus disability, as in this should never have happened to me. Like when you sustain a catastrophic injury, like I did, in fact, it doesn't fall between be disabled or this should have never happened to me. There's not a category which is shoulda, woulda, coulda. What if I'd done this differently, etc. Because first of all, nothing could have been done differently. But second of all, you cannot change it. In some ways, the fact that I ended up disabled was, you could argue, was that was sealed and signed when I was 17 years old and I joined the Corps. It was certainly a consequence that I had to factor in and a decision that I have to live by that came from that moment. Don't get me wrong, I fall within a minority of people that it happens to. But that's the thing which it gives you more than anything else, is that perspective, that driver. And it doesn't just give it to you, in fairness. My wife's got it because she has lived through hell in the last 10 years. And yes, there have been shiny moments and royal weddings and sporting competitions and stuff that she's watched from a distance, in fairness. Strictly 3 months at home with the kids. There's no glitz and glamour in that. But she could still turn the telly on a Saturday night and be extremely proud, because I sure as hell would not be here if it wasn't for her. I wouldn't have made it through the first week in hospital. I wouldn't have made it through any of them. All my successes are our successes. And as you know, mate, all of this stuff, all the scrapbook of life that I've got and the adventures that I've had, none of them are as good as being a dad. And actually, when you lie there in a hospital bed in those early days and you think about all the opportunities that are gone, and then in turn you see the doors open and new opportunities present themselves, and I've succeeded far beyond I could have ever expected. But still, family's the best bit of that, isn't it? I mean, they're just amazing, because again, those are the people that all these experiences are for, because they shape who you are, and therefore they shape who they are as people. And it's just the toughest part of it all. But like I say, probably more than anything, it keeps you on your toes, it keeps you moving forward, and it makes you have no excuses, because kids don't care about your excuses.
Yeah, they don't. JJ, I think that's a lovely way to round off. And again, wanted to highlight that your success, and you have been successful, has come at a cost. And it's not just the hiccup in Afghanistan that was the cost. It's the behind the scenes cost that people don't see. The small things that will affect your everyday life, not just being in front of a camera, pointing your toes in the right direction on Strictly, but it does come at a cost. And I think it's important that in widening that, success is about sacrifice, and you have to sacrifice more in a different way than others. So thank you very much. You're an amazing ambassador for the Royal Marines. You're an amazing ambassador for disability, to promote equity and not equality. And you're an amazing ambassador for your families. And I thank you for coming on the show and talking to me today.
Thanks, mate. It's been really nice to dig it all up, in fairness. And it's always the better to do it with a mate, because it makes you feel comfortable and at home. And if anything, it makes you dig a little deeper, because I know you've not just heard this, you've lived it with me. So, there's an extra layer to it. Thanks, mate.
Top man.